ultimately just the privilege is ours to be able to take this time to share with you a budget, share with you process, and ultimately walk through answering any questions. I also want to recognize that it's a year later since last time this committee was together. And over that year, obviously, COVID has had many impacts on everyone's lives on this call, and specifically had impacts on all of our students in our schools. In fact, just over the last few weeks, we've just gotten back into our schools. We've just gotten back into a hybrid format. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize that we're looking forward to continuing to build, continuing to get our students back. And ultimately, at this point, we are planning to be back in full in person for those families that choose to be in person in fall. We know a lot can change from now until then. We know that we might get different direction, but I want everyone on this committee that this budget's based on that. This budget is based on us trying to open for all of our students next fall. And with that said, I just ultimately want to recognize each of you this evening. And I know that we are in a Zoom call. I know that technology, you witnessed it. You witnessed behind the curtain as is this person logged in and how do we help that person? And that is just kind of how we do it. So I'm going to ask you and thank you for your patience and flexibility. And please, literally raise your hand like this because the chat phone is not working right now, or it looks like maybe the Q&A is working. It's down there, but please don't hesitate to ask and just let us know. You can even unmute and say, I have a question, and we'll kind of circle back around. So again, thank you for this Zoom environment, your patience, flexibility, and ultimately we'll walk through the agenda this evening. We'll talk about tonight, we'll talk about Thursday night, and we will be presenting the budget to you this evening to review. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Pat.
Good evening. Since Gary was our presiding officer for the meeting and he is no longer part of the committee, I will take over the items until we elect a new presiding officer. So I do want to give you an overview for tonight. We did offer up testimony for Thursday also. So the goal tonight will be go through the order of the business items, and then possibly after taking any testimony, then we can get into any questions on the budget, and then carry over into Thursday where we can take additional testimony if we receive any questions or folks that want to come and testify, and then we can finish any additional questions and then start deliberations on Thursday night. So with that, we are going to go forward for approval of the May 4th, 2020 Budget Committee meeting minutes. I'm going to do a roll call so we can determine your vote. So Sahar Maranovich.
Yes, aye.
Christine Larson.
Aye.
Stephanie Stevens.
Aye.
Donna Barber is absent still, correct? Aaron Barrow.
Aye.
Andrea Valderrama.
Aye.
Frida Christopher.
Aye.
Bobby Campbell.
Present.
Is that an aye or a nay?
That's an aye.
Okay. So Juan Mayoral, I think, is absent tonight. Christopher Pekarsky.
Aye.
Katrina Whittle.
Aye.
Mitzi Stone.
Aye.
Adriana Govea is absent tonight. Carrie Fry.
Aye.
Excellent. So now we'll move on to the election of a presiding officer for 2021-22 Budget Committee. Are there any suggestion motions for folks? Everybody's very quiet. Nobody wants to be the presiding officer. Frida, I saw you say something.
I was trying to figure out who was on the budget committee last year so we could select them.
I think I was, and I think Stephanie was, and I think a couple of the absent folks were. That's my recollection, at least.
Well, then I'm going to nominate you, Chris.
Lucky me.
We do usually try to get a budget person and not a board member to do it. So
Any other nominations?
I move we close nominations.
So shall we go ahead and vote on it again? Go through roll call. Stephanie Stevens,
Aye.
Christine Larson,
Aye.
Sahar Maranovich,
Aye.
Aaron Barry, Valderrama,
Aye.
Rita Christopher,
I,
Donna Barber is absent. Tori Campbell.
Aye.
Juan Mayoral is absent. Chris Pekarsky,
I suppose I.
Katrina Whittle,
Aye.
Mitzi Stone,
Aye.
Carrie Fry, oh, did we lose Carrie?
I think we lost her.
it looks,
I see her tile up, but she's muted.
Yeah. Carrie? Can you type in the chat?
She looks to be on by phone. So is it like *6 to unmute or?
There we go.
Thank you. *6. Sorry, my computer crashed. I was listening in on the phone. Yes, aye.
And Adriana Govea is absent. So Chris, with that, you get to preside over the meeting. So the next order of business is to determine the duration of the meetings. I'll turn it over to Chris.
So I think last year, if I read our minutes correctly, we decided to set the duration of the initial meeting to 9 p.m. I think that that's an excellent idea to do this year if everyone else agrees.
I'll make the motion to set the duration at 9 p.m.
Second.
I guess I get to say all those in favor.
Can we just put up our little hand raise thing?
Carrie is on the phone.
I can verbally aye. I'm working on logging back in here.
Do you want to go back through roll call?
I'm trying to find my little hand so I don't have, oh, here we go. It looks like I'm seeing a lot of hands up and Carrie gave an aye, and I haven't seen or heard anybody say nay. Is there anyone who would vote against?
Okay.
Looks like the next order of business is to hear the budget message by our superintendent, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for your willingness to be to chair this committee. I really do appreciate that. And just a quick background, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I know traditionally we've had a budget meeting or budget committee hearing of one evening, and we've gone through the process with one evening and talked about a 9 o'clock unless we're close, and then we'll keep deliberating and possibly take the vote. If you remember last year, there was discussions about providing more opportunity for input, and because this is kind of the first time the public's seen it, having an opportunity for input 3 days later or a few days later. So that's why we do have 2 evenings, right? The first evening, this schedule is going to look very traditional, how it's looked before, but obviously we will not be able to and are not planning on calling for a vote until Thursday, at which point we are open for testimony as well and continued questions and deliberations. So I just wanted to give some background on that. That was after we listened to our budget committee and our board members last year that we instituted this process and having at least 2 nights in the conversation. With that said, I do have a budget message that I'll be reviewing this evening. This budget message is in the budget book that was provided to you. Some of you may have read it already. I do not intend to read every single paragraph or read the whole budget message to you. I'm going to read pieces of it and basically then hand it over to Pat or to Chris in the next step in the agenda. We do have a PowerPoint, a number of different slides that contain most of the information in this budget message as well. And obviously there'll be a whole evening of questions. So that's, again, one of the reasons I won't read the entire budget message. But with that said, I presented operating budget for the David Douglas School District for fiscal year beginning July 1, 2021 and ending June 30th, 2022. As required by Oregon budget law, the proposed budget is balanced between total resources and requirements. We based our 21-22 budget on a proposed budget allocating $9.35 billion to the state school fund budget. This message and accompanying documents are presented in compliance with revised statutes chapter 294. As stated, we bring this budget to you as part of our compliance in the following local budget law. One thing we know for certain, there will be changes and we will need to modify the 2021-22 budget. Please note that this budget was based on the projected increase to the state school fund for the next biennium. The governor's proposed budget, as well as the co-chair's budget, have funded the state school fund at $9.1 billion, which is inadequate and below what we prepared on this budget. The state did not increase the projected roll-up from the same perspective as it has in the past, from a 49-51 yearly split, 49%, 51% yearly split. We anticipate, hope, and are actively having communication with our legislature to increase funding to the adequate current service level, which is why we are budgeting at a higher state allocation. Federal stimulus packages have been approved, and we are waiting to hear how the latest stimulus package will be implemented and what may be allocated to the district. A projected amount for each funding stream is included in this budget under the grants fund. Much of the formula funding will be used to purchase personal protective equipment, such as masks, shields, gowns, barriers, and HVAC, air purifiers, cleaning supplies, to hire custodians to help with keeping our business clean and safe, as well as complete HVAC improvements and build an online virtual academy, to name a few. We also know the state will present a new revenue forecast at the end of May, which may impact this proposed budget. Also, we want to point out that last year at this time, we anticipated a significant revenue decline due to the pandemic. However, because of the influx of stimulus funding, the impact has not been as deep or widespread as anticipated. The state's forecast assumed a local revenue increase of just under 3% statewide. This amount has fluctuated for our district from around 0.25% to about 3.5% over the last several years. The percentage of the state's budget funding, K-12, has decreased over the past 16 years. The district expects to receive just about $5.6 million over the biennium in support of high school success, including career technical education programs, college readiness, and dropout prevention, otherwise known as Measure 98, if the measure continues to be fully funded. Additional funding through the Student Success Act, SSA, passed during the 2019 legislative session is supported by a corporate activity tax. At this time, there is not a reduction to SIA funding projected. The district expected to receive $8.8 million from the student investment account in 2021. However, it only received $2.8 million due to the anticipated revenue declines. The district expects to see about $6.7 million for the 21-22 fiscal year. I'm pleased to share the district maintained its investment in early childhood education, including preschool programs, full-day kindergarten, as well as music and physical education programs throughout the K-12 system over the years. This past year, we were able to expand preschool and offer a bilingual preschool program at Lincoln Park Elementary School. The district plans to continue to offer a full complement of athletic and other co-curricular activities, as well as advanced placement and college courses. In developing this budget, we strive to keep our commitment for providing educational opportunities that will allow students to learn, grow, and thrive. However, due to enrollment decline and in turn revenue decline, there simply is not adequate funding to fund every need. And without the student investment account, many programming and services would have been eliminated or reduced. Also, our district has experienced a decrease in students over the past 6 years, as I just stated. And as we project forward, we are planning for another enrollment decline, as the chart below demonstrates. During the last 5 years, our district has seen significant decline in enrollment. In looking at our October enrollments from October 2015 to present, our elementary school enrollment has declined by about 1,000 students. And I'm just rounding numbers here, you guys. Our middle school enrollment has declined by about 160 students, and our high school program has declined by 300 students, estimated 300 students. So you could see again, far left 15, 16, if you see ADMW, and above that enrollment as of October. And then if you go over to the 2021-22 year, you'll see the declines in what we're talking about that. Our ADMW, average daily membership weighted, has also been affected by a decline in poverty. David Douglas School District saw decline from nearly 880 ADMW for poverty in 2014-15 to the 2021 ADMW of 492, a decline of 387 ADMW. The 2021-2022 budget would be an estimated $4.4 million to a district, or the decline would be estimated $4.4 million to the district. Our ADM has declined by just over 2,100. If we had this today, we would be seeing an additional $18 million in our general fund budget. Because the state school fund formula tries to mitigate a sudden change in funding, our ADMW for the state school funding for the 2021-22 will be based on a projected 2020-2021 ending ADMW. We anticipate that we will continue to see our resources decline along with our enrollment in ADMW in the years to come. Until our ADMW levels or increases, we will continue to need to reduce our requirements to meet the diminishing resources. I realize that paragraph has a whole lot of information in it, and part of the presentation this evening through Pat's slides, we'll be able to take a little more time to really look at that and have conversations. The district's 2021-22 proposed budget is $236 million and estimated, with the general fund being $138 million. The general fund budget attempts to take reductions in areas without creating a reduction in force or compromising our operations, such as maintenance and transportation, while taking into account prioritized programs. With that said, in the budget message you guys received, you see it's bold and in red. We do expect this to change, and a reduction in force may be necessary due to the financial volatility we face. So the reality is we still don't have a solid number from the legislature, and we aren't sure where enrollment will be. There's a lot of different moving parts at this point. The budget reallocates funding to some areas which represent additions while taking reduction in other areas. The general fund ending balance has increased due to reduced spending due to the pandemic. So some of the budget highlights, I'm not going to go through all these, but you'll see specifically curriculum additions, you'll see FTE additions, and then you'll see targeted investments to our diversity, equity, inclusion related to our strategic plan, really trying to fund that strategic plan in bits and pieces as we move forward. Also, you'll notice the student investment account in that it is allowing us to maintain elementary FTE, elementary instructional assistants, counselors, middle school health teachers, community sports, community recreation, and some programming. Again, the proposed budget is balanced, assuming a contingency at 5%. And finally, the David School District budget was constructed with the following objectives: looking for options to control spending during the 2021 school year. We have furloughed many staff this year due to the lack of work, which increased our ending fund balance. Ensuring that we maintain health and safety standards to assure proper learning environment for when students return. Focusing on minimizing staff and budget reductions based on the district's focus on students' performance, and continue to focus on student achievement goals. I would like to thank all staff for their efforts in preparing the 2021-22 budget, as well as the Budget Committee for volunteering their time and efforts in this budget process. In addition, all bargaining units have worked diligently with the district and their members to maximize efficiency, preserve staffing and programs, and to make a positive difference for our children. We have scrutinized the budget to make adjustments to minimize the loss of educational opportunities for our children, protect the instructional goals of the district, maintain health and safety standards in our buildings and grounds, and provide reserves for an uncertain financial future. The staff stands ready to assist the Budget Committee in the process of approving the 2021-22 school year budget. And lastly, we thank the School Board and Budget Committee for your volunteer service to the students of David Douglas School District. You are making a positive difference in the lives of children in our community to ensure they learn, grow, and thrive. Thank you so much. And that's the budget message this evening, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Pat Kumar now has the budget overview for the committee.
Richard, I'm getting a disabled.
Let me look into that right now. Oh,
Screen
screen sharing. Okay, let me see. Try it now.
Everybody see that?
Yes, looks good.
Excellent. So tonight we're going to go over the 2021-22 proposed budget. We are going to start with the budget process. So why do we have a budget and why do we have a budget process? Well, local budget law requires that a municipal corporation, which is what the school district is, may not spend money or ask the tax assessor to assess taxes on its behalf unless it's actually complied with local budget law. Local budget law comes under ORS Chapter 294. Local budget law prescribes the format and the content of the budget document. Sometimes we get a lot of questions about why there aren't certain things in the budget document. And a lot of it has to do with what's actually prescribed by law. The legal notices, so how do we actually let our constituents know that there's a budget committee meeting and a budget hearing? Again, the budget committee, what it's comprised of, how many members, the content of the budget message. It also prescribes getting that public testimony and public input of your citizens. The board resolution to adopt and appropriate the budget as well to declare and categorize the tax levies. And then it also prescribes what do you do when things don't go as planned, which never ever happens, right? So that is the supplemental budget process. And we've actually had 3 supplemental budgets this year for the 2020-21 budget. So going over a little bit on budget timelines, the district's timeline is that we start usually back in November and go through April. And we start preparing our budget materials, looking at projections and trying to figure out what exactly is going to go in the budget, whether reductions are needed, whether we can do any efficiencies. The superintendent then presents the proposed budget. That usually happens in late April or May, so just tonight. The budget committee then reviews and has public meetings in usually late April or early May. And then the school board will hold a public hearing and adopt the budget in June. So the budget committee responsibilities, so your responsibilities are to have a public meeting, which is what we're doing tonight, to take any public comment and questions, to approve the budget and approve the total taxes. Your fiscal powers by majority can specify the amount of tax revenue, establish the maximum expenditures. So note that's the expenditures, not the resources or revenues that we get. Approve the total taxes and approve the budget. After your approval, the budget hearing is held in June. The board will also have another opportunity for the public to come and testify. The board will review the budget and can amend the budget at that time. And that must be done by June 30th. Otherwise, we can't legally spend any funds starting July 1st. So as Ken mentioned, there will be another economic forecast on May 19th. So shoot, why don't we just wait till then? Well, the timing differences kind of cause a little bit of issue with that. So we would need to assess the forecast and any other implications and create a new plan. Again, we must have that budget adopted by June 30. The budget committee meeting requires 2 advertisements for dates and times for the public to come and testify at least 5 days and 10 days prior to the budget committee meeting. And then once the budget committee approves the budget hearing, there is an advertisement of at least 5 days prior to the hearing that we must have. So getting into the particulars of the budget, we're going to talk a little bit about fund accounting and budgeting. So the budget's made up of several divisions called funds. Each fund self-balances, as you heard Ken said, the resources and the requirements need to balance. Funds are classified as general, capital, internal service, debt service, and special revenue. So our proposed budget for next year is just over $236 million. As you can see in this graph, the general fund is the majority of it. You'll notice, especially if you look back in the special revenue, that special revenue is growing by leaps and bounds. Part of that for next year is due to our stimulus funding, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You'll see our capital project fund has declined, and just a reminder, the district spent out its bond, and we'll talk a little bit about that more when we talk about capital projects. So you'll see that fund go down. We have our debt service and internal service. So our general fund resources, you'll notice in bold the state school fund and the property taxes. Those are the primary components of the general fund, also called our operating fund. That's where the majority of the district's operating expenses lie. When we look at those resources, you'll notice that out of 138 million, 98 million come from the state. 16, nearly 17 million come from local property taxes. And again, you'll notice that beginning fund balance, that has grown. We've really had some significant declines in expenditures this year. And due to the pandemic, we have not seen, we haven't been running our buses as much. We have had staff on furlough. We have not needed as much in supplies and just general operational costs. So getting to those state resources, we received the primary component of that is our state school fund grant. That grant is actually reviewed and updated over a 2-year period. So the factors that go into that grant calculation include average daily membership, or ADM or ADMW. You often hear us talk about that. And ADMR is resident. ADMW is weighted. That means that the district gets an extra share of funding for certain categories. Some of those categories are ESL, IEP, pregnant and parenting, poverty. And we'll talk a little bit about poverty in a minute. We also get 70% of our transportation expenditures in the transportation grant, which goes into our state school fund formula. Our local revenue actually is offset on the state school fund. So when you go out and look at the calculators out on the state website, you'll notice that they deduct local revenue. That's in order to, as part of the formula, to equalize across the state the ability to tax locally with the state school fund contributions. As Ken mentioned, we are estimating at $9.35 billion for the 2021 biennium. So that is higher than the current governor's proposed budget and the co-chair's budget. Those are both at $9.1 billion. As Ken mentioned, our ADM and enrollment have been declining. So you can see here in 2017-18, our enrollment for the district, this does not include our charter school, was at 10,222. Our estimate for next year, 8,819. You can see that poverty ADMW, that's that extra weighting for poverty. As Ken mentioned, back in 14-15, we were one of the highest in the states, and we were about 880, if I can recall that number. And you'll see that next year we're expecting to go down. We'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. You can see that the actual general purpose grant for ADMW has increased since 2017-18 by nearly $1,000 per student, just under. And you'll see that our overall ADMW there in the blue, right above the red line, it's down a couple thousand from 13,313 to 11,205 projected for next year. So when we talk about poverty and how the state calculates poverty, you'll hear SAPE, or Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates Program. That's a mouthful. And so what I'm sharing here is our district's SAPE data from 2011 to 2019. You'll notice that our overall district population has increased. You'll notice that there's been a slight uptick and then downtick this in 2019 in the 5-year-old to 17-year-old population. But you'll also notice that since 2011, the number of students in poverty has declined pretty significantly. The data that the federal government uses to prepare this includes the IRS state level data, SNAP benefits from state and county, and also some poverty data that they collect from the state and county. The reason that this is important is because if folks aren't getting benefits through the federal government, they may not be calculated in this poverty calculation. And that in turn affects our funding level. So the state school fund, you'll notice in 18-19 and 19-20, it was pretty flat, 704,000. You'll notice an uptick this year, and you'll notice they're projecting downward for next year. So that's a little bit concerning because if that's incorrect, then the dollar amount per student that you saw a couple slides earlier will decrease if there's actually more ADMW in the state. So again, we talked about that 13,313 versus the 11,540, and that's actually the 2021. As a reminder, Ken mentioned that we always are funded at the higher of the projected year or the current year. David Douglas has been funded on the prior year's ADMW now for 5 or 6 years. We anticipate that to continue for at least the next 2 years. So some revenue uncertainty that we've had. We've seen our Title I IDEA funds go down. We do have larger carryovers due to the pandemic. We are hearing there may be some increases in grant funding dependent upon new federal administration goals. The legislature issues with revenue, will they actually change the state school fund from that 9.1 billion up to a higher level of 9.3, 9.4, or what COSA is lobbying for at 9.6? One of the discrepancies that school districts are having with the way that the governor's budget was put together is that it was not based on current service level. The last biennium was a 50-50 split. We usually do a 49-51 split. That means they weight the second half of the biennium a little bit heavier because they anticipate that you're going to have some inflationary increases with staff salaries. There'll just be general inflation in contracts and things that you purchase. That is not how they started it. They started it based on the 50%. So that's where there's a little bit of a discrepancy, and we are hoping that they will come to terms with that. We know that there are discussions going on, and so that's why we are budgeting at the little bit higher level. Again, the amount of funding that the state has provided has continually decreased. And that's not including the Student Success Act. And the reason I'm not including that is because there is a quality education model that was done many years ago, and that is supposed to be a baseline. The Student Success Act really is to enhance your programs, and it has specific targets and requirements. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not including that at this time. We will include it in the budget, of course, and we'll talk about it when we get to the grants fund. So here's an overview of our property taxes. You can see we are projecting that the assessed value will increase by about 3%. You can see for the last number of years, it's floated right around 3%. So last year, you can see that I was just a little bit low at 3.571 billion, and it came in at 3.588. And so our taxes that will be assessed will be just over the $17 million. Now we're going to move into general fund requirements. That's our expenditures and how do we actually spend the money. You'll see that the largest priority, of course, is our salaries and benefits. So 109, nearly 110 million of our 138 is our salaries and benefits. So oftentimes we get asked, why don't you just trim those supply budgets or cut those purchase services? Well, it's hard to cut down the heat, which is in purchase service, and electricity. And you'll see that 6% of our budget is supplies and materials. That's not a great place to cut. So just to let you all know what are some uncertainties in our requirements or our expenditures for the year, we're negotiating with all our employee groups. We just actually started, and so we have yet to have finalized agreements. So all the numbers in here are based on projections. We have not gotten our health insurance rates for next year. We anticipate that to be next month. And we may have some additional impacts in unemployment. So our favorite topic of PERS, or Public Employee Retirement System. So you can see here the rates since 2013-15. And you'll notice that that year, if you look at the tier 1, tier 2, which is in the middle of the page, we had a 19.12% PERS rate, and that's for somebody in tier 1, tier 2. That means that for an employee who was PERS tier 1, tier 2, the district paid on their behalf 19.12% into PERS. You'll notice that in 15-17, the rate went down a little bit. Then you'll notice in 17-19, the rate spiked up. You notice that it'll tick back up in 19-20, 20-21. And then you'll notice that it's going down again in 21-23. Those are all determined by PERS and the valuations that are going on. And so, well, we've noticed a pattern of it'll go up a little bit for a few biennia and then back down. So what we anticipate is that in the 23-25 biennia, you'll see another uptick upwards. And you'll notice that the same has happened for our Oregon Public Service Retirement Plan. And those two PERS plans are dependent upon the timeline in which you actually enrolled in PERS. So just to give you an overview, how does that rate change affect the budget? You'll notice that here we have the 2021 salary of $85,915 in the middle of the page. And you'll see a tier 1, tier 2. And you'll see what that salary with a small increase. So a person at the same salary level would get a small increase for the next year. But you'll see that change in PERS is about nearly $4,300. So one of the things that you'll notice in the budget is that the salaries didn't really tick up as much, as they have in the past. The reason for that is the district is looking at paying the PERS pickup rather than offering a COLA. So you'll see that the PERS rate for a tier 1, tier 2 declined just over 5 percentage points. And you'll notice that the PERS pickup is 6%. So you'll notice that in the first example, the overall change is $1,200. The same calculation is below for OpSERP. I see that I'm missing my title here, but the top calculation is for a tier 1, tier 2. The bottom calculation is for somebody in OpSERP. So this year we do have contingency at 5%. Again, if we don't come in at that 9.35 and we come in at something lower, that's something that the board may need to consider, is reducing contingency. One of the reasons we don't like to do that, we like to see a strong fund balance, is it's a measure of our financial strength. It's often used by rating agencies and financial institutions when we go out for our debt service, when we go out for our bonds. They want to see that we are planning ahead and we're not using all of our funds down to the last penny. It provides for a cushion when there are revenue changes and shortfalls. Last year, as we discussed, we didn't know where we were going to be at. We had a pretty dismal revenue outlook from the state. And then last fall, that completely did a 180. So wasn't quite what we expected in the fall, which was actually good news. So we want to make sure that we're able to cushion any type of shortfall that may come in the future. It's also a tool for long-term planning, and just a reminder, it's a one-time resource. Once you spend it, it's spent. So to give you an overview and to see how our ending fund balance has kind of impacted our budget, you usually want to see that your actual resources or revenues that are incoming, less your beginning fund balance, are equal to or less than your net expenditures. You'll notice here we have a gap of about $12 million. So what that is saying is that we have the potential to be spending 12 million of that 18 million just in operating our day-to-day business next year. We're going to switch over here and go into our special revenue funds. These funds are for dedicated or restricted revenues. Those restrictions may come from a grantor or a statute. Again, this is one of the largest areas. You'll notice that grants fund has exploded over the years. That has probably more than doubled in the last couple of years, primarily due to the Student Success Act, as well as the federal stimulus funding. You'll see our nutrition services, technology, student body, and we'll go through here and talk a little bit about our grants fund. So at 87 million, the majority or primary components of this is our early childhood special education program. That comprises about 31 million for their contract. It includes their Medicaid funding, peers, and early childhood evaluations that the district also does for neighboring districts. We have Measure 98, which is expected to be 2.9 million for next year, or just under. We have Title I at 4.2. We have IDEA. We have our arts tax, and you'll notice that that's a little bit of a decline. That corresponds to our decline in enrollment. And then you'll see that we have the student investment account. We actually get two allocations, one for our K-12 program, as well as one for our early childhood program. The early childhood program did not receive a decline in the 2020-21 year in its Student Success Act funds, whereas the district did. So we're anticipating about 6.7 million for K-12 for next year in the student investment account. Our original plan, if you recall, was at 8.8 million for our current fiscal year. Much of that was to continue existing programming, and I won't read through the whole list there, but there were quite a few programs that we ended up maintaining or thought we were going to maintain with this funding. Then we were going to do some additions, expansions of instructional assistants, expand our community sports program, and then also develop some training programs for instructional assistants. After the pandemic started and we got the very poor outlook in revenue, we got a revised allocation from the Oregon Department of Education, and it went from 8.8 million expected for the 2020-21 school year to 2.8 million. Basically, that 2.8 million covered those two items in green above, the retained counselors and retained elementary PE teachers. So for next year, with the 6.7, everything under continuing existing programming, except retaining high school summer school, is anticipated to be funded. So we don't anticipate to funding the high school summer school program. We have several different grant funds that will help cover those costs, including some additional state funding that we may tap into, which they recently provided, approved through the legislature. And there are a couple different packages with that for K-8, for high school, as well as some childcare options that the district will be looking at. So again, we're talked about the federal stimulus funding that the district received. And we affectionately call it ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, even though that doesn't really correspond to the titles of the appropriations. So the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation Act, which is quite a mouthful, or ESSER 2 as we call it, is it for expenses relating to the pandemic. We were allocated just under 13 million. This is a multi-year grant. We anticipate spending about 6.1 million in the next school year. The funding will go towards additional custodians, PPE for students and staff, HVAC and air purifier filters, online school program, additional nurse, and curriculum for middle and high school. Our charter school, Arthur Academy, also receives some pass-through on both of these stimulus packages. Then under the American Rescue Plan, the district, we have not yet received our final allocation. Our estimates are somewhere between $29 and $30 million. Again, this is a multi-year grant. 20% of it is dedicated towards learning loss, which includes after-school programming as well as summer school programming. We anticipate using about 8.1 million in the next fiscal year. We will cover some food services overages due to the pandemic, which is about $1.1 million since the last March of 2020. We do anticipate doing some HVAC upgrades or new HVAC systems, and we'll be looking and narrowing down the schools for that. And then I mentioned that there is some state funding for summer school that does require a match from the district, and the match may be paid from federal funding or general fund. It just obviously cannot be paid from the state school grant that we'll be receiving for summer school. I'm going to move along here to our debt service fund. These funds retire our outstanding debt. We have two funds, one for our PERS bonds, as well as one for our general obligation bonds. Our general obligation bonds are sold to finance capital projects. There we go. And as I mentioned, that bond, we just finished up all the capital projects, I believe, last year. You're going to see that information, I think, for another year in your book, as we need to report for 2 years. Then we and that's in our capitals projects area. So we have our GO bonds, which make up the larger proportion of our debt service, as well as our PERS bonds. So our capital projects fund, as we mentioned, the GO bond receipts go into the capital projects fund. This fund is currently closed and all the projects, all the funds have been used for projects. We do have a capital reserve fund that accounts for capital projects from other sources. Primarily, it is from stadium usage fees. And we used to rent Deerdorf, our Deerdorf properties out. We no longer do that, so there is no continued revenue source for that purpose. And then we also collect construction excise tax. And so those taxes can be used for capital projects that are in our approved facility plan. So as you can see, the majority of the funds here are construction excise tax. We've not tapped into that. We do plan on tapping into that for hopefully some roofing projects that we need to get done. And last but not least, our internal service funds. We record transactions that provide services to other programs in the district. We have two, the insurance fund and the reprographics and postal services fund. You'll notice that over the last few years, our insurance fund has dwindled. You will notice an increase in our general fund to help cover that, any anticipated costs. Our insurance fund does pay for those deductibles and claims that we have. And then our reprographics and postal services fund, we have about $425,000 in that fund, and that pays for all the postage and the printing that the schools do and get charged back. Are there any questions?
And just so folks know, there have been efforts to get chat and Q&A working tonight, but we're still having technical issues. If you go into question and answer and you want to write a question, you can use the answered question that we have in there and type an answer as a string to ask new questions.
Chris, I see that Frida has her hand up as well. Looks like asking a question.
Okay, Frida.
Just a clarifying point on the waiting for poverty. I think you said it's either the current year, which is 2021, or the projected year, which is 21-22. Is that correct?
Well, poverty is a little bit interesting because if you remember that chart that I had in the presentation, it went to 2019. And you're like, we're in 2021. Where are you? So the data is from the federal government. That takes a little while to get processed. So they do announce those revised amounts in December of each year. And the revised amounts are always done for the year prior. So they're always a year behind. So that's where it gets a little confusing because the SAPI numbers are a year behind. And if you've been around a while, you'll remember that the poverty numbers used to be done on the federal census. So there was always a big lag because everybody knows the federal census is done every 10 years. So there was a bit of a big lag on how they calculated your poverty numbers in the state school fund. They chose to move to the SAPI because it was quote unquote more current data than what the census could provide. And so we are always going to be a little bit behind on our poverty numbers and doing a catch up. And so the poverty number that's done, for example, for 2021 will be the December SAPI number. That's actually 2019 December number.
So when will they, because it showed state income being being part of it. When would the people's income, the 20 year, the people are filing now be seen, I guess?
I need to look at the calculation and confirm, but I believe that you're not going to see that for probably until 2022's calculation.
And they'll always give you the higher of the two?
Well, so they'll always give you the higher of your total ADMW. So they never look at each individual component of ADMW. What they'll do is they'll take the numbers from 2021, which will include the 2019 number. They will look at what your forecast is. So the district gives a forecast in December to the Oregon Department of Education for the upcoming school year. And they'll look at those two numbers, and then you will get the higher of those two numbers. But they won't actually look to see your poverty number. They will calculate for you. So I don't get to go in and decide that my poverty number is going to be higher. They will actually calculate that, and that's not a number they collect from us.
No, I understand that. I was just curious because 20 is the year where there was a lot of drop in income. And East Portland was heavily impacted in that area with a higher level of poverty based on my conversations with city bureaus. So it only seems as if they're using income and some of those factors, our poverty has increased in our district. That's why I was curious about it. But it sounds like it gets mixed up with all the numbers, so it may not have as big of an impact.
No, unfortunately, they wouldn't go in and tweak that. They would take the current number and project it forward.
Okay. Oh, and you don't have this now, but at some point, can you get us, I'd like to know between tier 1 and 2 and Osprey, what percentage of staff is in the tier 1 and 2 and what percentage of staff is in the Osprey for PERS?
Yep, I can bring that to our next meeting.
Thank you. That's all for the moment.
Did anyone else have any questions for Pat? And Frida, your hand's still up. Tori.
Yeah, thank you, Pat, for going through that extensively and putting it in layman's terms. Really appreciate that. Just curious if you can share a little bit more of what was, obviously with the budget constraints, what was maybe some of the rubric or just the kind of the value propositions that you all kind of walked through when you thought about where you needed to cut and what you wanted to hold on to. Like as an example, it's not necessarily something I'm married to, but it was an example you showed, like the summer programs would be cut. So if you can kind of share some of the maybe high level thinking of what was being weighed and evaluated throughout the whole of the budget, or maybe some of the high areas you want to highlight, like here's a place where there's a lot of tension or rub that we really had a lot of consternation over. I think that was just, for me personally, I think it helps me understand some of the hard decisions that were being made, trying to balance the budget and also try to retain as much as we can, knowing that, you know, we're dealing with the unique season.
Sure. So a couple different things is we had to look at timelines for certain things. So like our Student Success Act funding, if we wanted to, so last year we submitted a plan to the state that the state approved for what we were going to fund out of that. So if we wanted to change that, we would have to go through a new community process in order to modify that. being in the budget situation that we are and looking at, will we get to 9.3 or not? You'll notice that a lot of the things that we proposed as ads are what I would call a one-time thing. You'll see a lot of curriculum. You'll see some, I think we had some buses in there, things that if push came to shove, we would have to figure out other funding or delay the purchase of. So what we do as a cabinet is we have two different processes that we go through. So the schools receive a request, a budget request list that they can put things on to add things to the budget or to bring things up that they would like to see added. Then cabinet members also have a list that they go through and add things in. A lot of this that we had during the last cabinet list, also we tried to marry up with what is our strategic goal and strategic plan look like, and where can we maybe add some things, and in hopes that we don't have to cut them, to get ourselves in line with that. And Ken, do you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think, Tori, the biggest area where we see reductions, fortunately, although just general cuts, is through basically attrition. So because our enrollment's going down, we've been reducing FTE over the last number of years. We've been fortunate that those FTE have been through attrition and not an actual reduction in force. Excuse me, but unfortunately, it still is reductions, right? And it still is an impact to services and to kids, but it's kind of, we talk about right sizing and as we go through the process. Some of the things you've seen, and Pat can explain it, or we can go back to some slides, like summer school, we do plan on having summer programming. In fact, we're planning on a more robust planning, but what's happening is it's coming through different grant funds. So we have different funds coming in through the ESSER grants and then through our Oregon legislature as well, specifically targeting summer programming. So if you see some areas where we're not offering it, we're planning to offer it through other grant funds specifically. So this budget in general does not have a lot of large cuts other than specific FTE due to enrollment dropping. But we don't know, as in the position we were in last year, and to be quite honest, as we're in a position every year because of the law to build a budget by June 30th, but not knowing what our budget is coming from the legislature, we're a little bit, okay, if it comes in at 9.1, it's going to be a different story. We are going to have to go back to the drawing board and talk more about those stress points and where do we possibly make some difficult decisions like Pat's talking about, and or where do we invest. What we've done in this budget, although it is tight and it is not at 9.6, which is QEM, we've still, because of some of the added funding through grants and because of our priorities that were identified to our strategic plan, where we have seen additions, they were related to that diversity, equity, inclusion piece. Not enough. I'd love to add more, and I hope in years to come we will continue to add more in all of the areas of the strategic plan. But it's a start. Is basically where we're at. So I don't know, Pat, if there's specifically, Troy, I don't know if you are Tori, excuse me, not Troy. Tori, I'm sorry about that. If you had specific, I know earlier you mentioned something that you saw on a slide that you're questioning, and Pat can answer that better or not.
No, you provided, both you provided kind of an overview of just the thinking decision-making process. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Pat and Ken.
Next, we have Aaron.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions. As far as the reduction in the Student Success Act funding, I was wondering why the decision was made to cut the instructional assistants that we were planning on hiring. I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I was just hoping you can expand on that a little bit.
So we were adding or planning to add some balancing FTE. And then also some FTE to our specialized programs. And we haven't cut that, we simply haven't funded it. So we didn't have any funding this year for it. As a reminder, we went from 8.8 to 2.8 million in the student investment account. So we did not fund it this year. And we really want to just maintain what we can in order to provide the best resources we can. If we wanted to fund it, we would need to reduce somewhere else. So we still will be retaining our kindergarten instructional assistants. And so we have funded those in the SIA funding.
Oh, thank you. Second question with the ESS ER3 funding. I was just hoping you can expand on what 20% being devoted to learning loss means.
So 20% devoted to learning loss means that we're looking at expanding options to help mitigate any learning loss. So they're looking at summer school programs. So like I mentioned, the state has put forth some funding that requires a match for the summer school programming this summer. And so that requires a 25% match, which we can pay out of those ESSER dollars. And so we do anticipate doing that. And that's getting back to Tori's question, is when we're looking at funding, sometimes it's like, putting a puzzle piece together. And so this puzzle piece now goes over into this little puzzle because this is where the funding best aligns. And so we'll be looking at, we may potentially look at our SUN programming coming out of ESSER. So that would be something that would qualify. And the reason I say that is, again, I have a 6.7 million estimate at this time. I don't have actual allocations, and they won't give us final allocations until our ADMW is in for the end of this year.
Okay. Second question is a chunk of that was going to the HVAC upgrade, 6 million. Is that more like air purifiers, or is this complete rebuilding of HVAC systems in different schools?
Correct. So this would actually be installing new HVAC systems in the schools. And so it would probably only cover 2 to 3 schools. And so that's one of the things we're looking at, that facility assessment that we did, and looking at which HVAC systems really need to be prioritized. And then we're also looking at doing a little further investigation into filtration in the HVAC systems that we'll be putting in. And we will also investigate the 2-letter word, the air conditioning, because we know that as we move forward, and if we do build a new elementary school, that would be something that I think we would want to have, being that our buildings now are running more frequently in the summer with summer programming. So.
Okay, thank you. I think, yeah, just one last question. Yeah, the air conditioning. I remember when my kids went through SUN a couple summers ago, and I was really worried because we hit 110 degrees that summer, and there's no HVAC at Ventura, so that was one of my major concerns. Or maybe it was 107, but it was up there. So if there's a summer school match that we're gonna need to hit, if they're doing summer school programming for learning loss this summer, will we need to find some funds in our budget to kind of match what they're giving us? Or did I just kind of misinterpret that?
Yeah, so we don't need to find it in the general fund. And so that's where it's coming out of the ESSER 3, is we've kind of anticipated that some of that will be earmarked as a match payment to go along with our state funding that we're going to apply for. And my understanding on the state application is that it is just formula-based application. They want to make sure that you hit the marks, and there'll be some reporting, but it is not a what I would call a traditional competitive application where people will be denied. So if your application doesn't quite meet what they expect for summer school, they will work with you to get it to what they expect.
Okay, thanks, Pat. That's all I've got for now.
I had seen Katrina Whittle's hand up for a bit, but it's gone down. If you had something, Katrina, put your hand back up, but otherwise, I don't see
I'm
any.
good, thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up at this point for questions. Oh, Frida, sorry.
Sorry about that. I have actually quite a few questions. But I'll stick to about 4 right now, and you may or may not be able to answer them tonight. I've actually read through the whole budget, and on 4.29 in regard to special ed, I have a question because our mid-year transfers, we lost 46 students, SPED students, or budget members at special ed students in the mid-year moves. And we have students that are very expensive because they have to be outplaced. Is this going to have an impact on the budget needs for that area? Because that's quite a few students. And I did, when I analyzed the numbers, because I'm doing it for a city council presentation or something I want to give to a city council budget meeting. Most of the students, those groups who are overrepresented, they are BIPOC and special ed students, they're overrepresented in these moves. They also tend to have the higher amounts of poverty. So, and transportation is a barrier for many people with poverty, so that it's less likely that they may be returning next fall. So I was just, that's one thing I'm curious about. It might be something Mary would have to look into. The other thing is on 4.56 regarding student safety. We lost SROs just over a year ago. The city eliminated that program. We used SROs for many different things, especially at the high school. So is that going to cause us to need more funds for student safety especially at the high school, that we didn't have to pay before? And then the next one I have under guidance services, 24.58. I noticed a 1.5 increase in counselors. Where is that counselor going in the counseling service?
So that's actually not an addition. That's kind of a balancing act between the Student Success Act and what we had anticipated moving over versus what we can afford. And so we're kind of waiting to again hear on that Student Success Act. Are we going to be able to afford everything, or am I going to need to pull some staffing back over?
Oh, okay, because I didn't see where it was deducted anywhere in a grant area. And the last one under health services, 4.60, we show an increase in classified health assistants, increasing their hours. And some of that ESSER fund, could some of that be used for that type of thing?
Some of that could be. We chose not to do that because we anticipate the need to be long-term. And so you'll notice that we increased, we had several 4-hour assistants, and it really wasn't covering the school day. So that's why we increased the 4 to 6 hours. And the middle school, we actually had some of our clerical staff wear 2 hats. And so you'll see that there's 2 1/4 FTE or 3 6-hour assistants added for middle school, 1 for each middle school for a health assistant.
Okay, I do have one more on 4.70 and improvement in instructional services. You're adding a TOSA for social studies. Is that a new position? And if it is, how do you see that person working? I was curious because there's really push for ethnic studies, which history is a lot of. And I was curious if this is part of your push for equity to get those ethnic studies more ingrained in our classrooms versus having special courses, et cetera, or special days.
There are some new course requirements. I'm gonna let Brooke speak to that, but yes, that's why Brooke was like, we really, really need this. So Brooke?
Yeah, I'm so excited to see this in the budget. There's a lot of legislation coming through the State Department, which is just the right work, specifically around tribal history and shared history. And then there's also ethnic studies, and then there's all legislation around Holocaust and genocide. And so having somebody who could help facilitate that work and lead that work and make sure that it gets into instruction and gets into our classrooms and where does it live and support teachers will help us actually do that work and do it well.
Okay, I thought that might be it, but I just wanted to double check.
Thanks
And I'll leave the rest of my questions for next Thursday.
Pat, I noticed, Amrita, I noticed Kelly kind of turned her. Do you have anything to add, Kelly, around that? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Kel.
And I saw Mary also popped on. Did you have anything, Mary?
No, I'm good. Just
Okay.
Thank you.
And I saw Stephanie Stevens had her hand up, but it's down. Do you have anything, Stephanie?
Just that in thinking through this past year and the unanticipated savings having to do with COVID and shutdowns, I'm just wondering how much of this budget is also built thinking through what it would mean to return 5 full days full-time opening in the fall, particularly around buses and other things that we're going to need to think about. Or is that sort of like, because it took a while to just sort of jigger the hybrid model. And I assume that there's a lot of, not to quote John Rumsfeld, but there's a lot of unknown unknowns in reopening. So one is how much of this budget is, I would just advocate keeping that contingency at 5% if we possibly can, because it seems like there's going to be a lot of unknown unknowns with the pandemic.
Sure. So this budget is built as if we are coming back in person full time.
I think what Stephanie's asking, Pat, is related to what thinking have we've given to added resources or added.
Right. Just because we're not going to return full time to the way that things were, right, pre-pandemic. It's not like everyone's going to be, we have space issues still, and we have, so I'm just wondering how much has been thought through, or is it sort of like we just don't know yet?
So some of it's been thought through. You'll notice that in the building care and upkeep, there was an increase for heat and for lights or electricity. Those were things that we thought about because we are trying to run the buildings at a higher outside air inflow. That means that you're heating cooler air. And so instead of recycling some of the air through, so we anticipate our heating costs to go up. We also increase the electricity because we did just add 800 air purifiers to the buildings. Yeah. And so those 2 items we did put into our regular budget because we do feel like those are probably going to be ongoing costs that we will see. The added costs, the filters, the MERV 13 HVAC filters are things that we added to our grant funds. So we did anticipate some of the costs for next year. We are increasing or trying to increase our custodial staff by at least 1 at each building to help with the disinfecting and cleaning. So PPE, we anticipate that to potentially be $2 million a year. So that's masks, shields, cleaning wipes, and those sorts of things. So we do anticipate that to be funded through the ESSER funding. And we do, as I mentioned, those ESSER grants are multi-year grants. And so if we needed to tap into something, we do have that option there to kind of tap in for an approved purchase or an approved item there. Does that help answer?
To a certain extent, I mean, I think that I was thinking more along the lines of staffing, knowing that that's the biggest expense of the district, and also thinking through, space, maybe needing more teachers or more assistants than are in this budget to actually make it function. Depending, of course, you don't know how many people want to stay distant. And then secondarily, like getting kids to and from the schools, like given the pandemic situation is likely not going to be gone in September. That's really the biggest expenditure. I mean, I can understand some things you can plan for like PPE and airflow, but actually educating kids and all the stuff that we have been through over the past year, right? About how many are staying home, how many are coming in, do we have space, like how many teachers, how many instructional assistants do we have to, those things. I'm just wondering, was that like considered when building this budget, or were we just going off FTE like pre-pandemic?
So what we did is we tried to estimate what we thought would be coming back for next fall. We are anticipating also the online academy. And so we actually have that started. We're starting work on that and getting that rolling and trying to get that lined up so that, because we do anticipate that there is going to be a certain number of parents and students that aren't comfortable for returning. And so, and maybe Ken can talk a little bit about what the expected student count was versus what the actual student count was for hybrid as we came back.
Yeah, I shared that with the board. We're currently going through that process, and what Pat's talking about is we do continually right now, we're offering CDL for those families who do not want to come back into hybrid, right, is what Pat alluded to. But really specifically, Stephanie, what you're asking for is what other investments or thoughts have been gotten to. And Pat shared a lot of the safety items that we're really focusing on. And one of the reasons we focus so much more, Stephanie, and I know you know this, is staffing is ongoing. So we're kind of limiting those additional staffing decisions till we have a better idea of what's happening specifically with enrollment as we go through the summer, as we develop the summer school, how many are actually accessing that, how many are signing up for virtual online academy, which we will have stood up by this fall and running for our community. So based on some of that information, we might know, hey, we need more staffing. And that's where Pat was discussing ESSER 3s, ESSER funds in general, multi-year, we can reallocate, right? We can shift. There's some things we can look there based on needs, but we did intentionally try not to focus too much of those one-time dollars into staffing because the bottom falls out, right? Anytime you fund an ongoing expense with one-time money, it gets a little troublesome. But I understand what you're saying and absolutely agree that, hey, as we come back this fall, it's not just business as usual. We've been out over a year, right? So the startup next year, what does it look like? One, from the safety and cleanliness and buildings and facilities, which we're ahead of, or not ahead of, we have plans for right now. But the other side is the connection with kids and the staffing and the number of adults to students. And does that look different? Do we need more mental health supports? Do we need more counselors? Do we need more? I hear that question and we don't have an answer for that yet, Stephanie, because we don't know all the information yet.
Frida?
Just kind of a follow-up question, because Stephanie's question raised a question for me. Then is the online academy plan to be K through 12 then?
That's correct.
Okay, which is great, because I sent you some information that Colorado, what the school district in Colorado was doing, and they've had their academy for about 5 years. So their kids are now back 5 days a week, the ones that wanted to come back, because it made it possible. And also another question that's come up in some of our emails, are we looking in the fall to go to, instead of the 6 feet spacing, then to 3 foot spacing?
Yes, well, we'll go forward with whatever is required. So if it's 3 feet still, or if that spacing changes, we'll follow that. But yes, our intention is based on the indicators, and again, this is tough because how things play out. If it is 3 feet and only 3 feet, and there's certain restrictions, then we will use that. Our hope is as it changes over the summer, vaccines continue, that we'll be in a position to open up schools fully with masks, right? Maybe we don't have to do some of the other restrictions, but we're going to have to listen, learn, and follow whatever requirements are set before us. But again, what we've sent out to our community, Frida, and I've shared with the board, right now our plans are to open everyday instruction for students, full day instruction for students with supports, and the option for those families and students who do not want to return. We won't have CDL, but what we will have is an online David Douglas Virtual Academy in place for, like you said, K-12. We're currently researching that process. There is a budget we've identified. We're exploring models right now. And in fact, we can look forward in the next couple of weeks, we'll probably have a communication out to all of our families, just trying to get data. If we have this program available, are you interested, or will you be coming back full-time into schools? And really communicating that CDL won't be an option next year, right? It will either be an online academy or schools. Those are the two models we'll be serving. And it's not a quote unquote commitment yet, but what it will be is communication so we can better understand and plan as we move forward. But if it is still a restriction around 3 feet, then I believe we'll be transitioning. In fact, we're planning to transition to the 3 feet over summer school. Frida, as we're planning summer school, we're looking at transitioning to that 3 feet for summer school this summer.
Okay, when you reach out, you say, I would suggest reaching out to the whole community, because I know with my nieces, their school, they get a lot of homeschoolers who take advantage of the online academy. So it could be a source of additional students, especially at the high school with some of the other classes that are more difficult to teach at home.
Yeah, great idea. And that one of the things we are planning is not only current enrollment, but we have students that we know have chosen to be in different charter schools and online schools. We'll be reaching out to every one of those families and students, which is, I think, is what you just said, Frida. But we have documentation on that, and we will definitely be reaching out and communicating our program, what we're offering, what it looks like, the support, et cetera.
Thank you.
I see no other hands up. Is there anyone else who would like to put their hand up? All right, I guess, thank you, Pat, for your presentation. I'm kind of looking to the group for guidance on how to proceed. It seems like there may be members of the public who planned to speak tonight. I don't know if there are. But it would make sense to me probably to take whatever public comment might be available tonight, and then probably defer conversation and deliberations and public comment to Thursday, since we will be meeting Thursday, so that people have time to process the information they've learned tonight.
Yeah, Chris, Richard, I don't know if you want to share, but Chris, we did not have anyone sign up for public comment tonight. So we don't have anyone. Is that accurate, Richard?
That's correct. We published a notice in the Oregonian, and we posted notice of the hearing on the district website, added it to the calendar feed. And I've triple checked my emails and my voicemail. I was listed as the contact, and I'm not aware of any request to speak tonight.
Did you put it on our Facebook page and Twitter feed as well? Have Dan do that?
No, I didn't. I can connect with Dan about that moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's important too. Not everybody looks at those other sources.
Also, I know there are principals here in the waiting room, and often they just come and listen, because they want to know what's in store. But I don't know if any of them have anything that they'd like to share with the budget committee. I'd love to see them, Chris, get an opportunity to talk if they'd like to, since they're here.
Is that something that can happen, Richard, since they're in the attendee list and not the panelist list?
That's certainly something that can happen. I think the most effective way might be for them to raise their hand if possible, and I can enable that. Let me see, I can also just go through and change the permissions. But yeah, please, if anyone has any input, please let us know.
So Stephanie and crew, we specifically, as we ended this meeting, I was going to recognize and thank our administrators. They are the best group of administrators in the state, period. But we ask them to come every year, one, to be part of this process, but two, sometimes there's questions specifically about, let's say, preschool programming, and we have elementary principals here that have preschool programs, or many times there's a question specifically related to the high school, in which John Byer, we ask him to unmute, and so they're there standing ready to serve. But I love, Stephanie, specifically you asking them, do they have any input or any questions? So I think Richard's added team, all of you into, so if you have anything you'd like to add or ask, if you want to raise your hand or unmute, please don't hesitate to do that.
I see Dwayne Larson's hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I don't have much to add, but I do want to tell you that I listened, and Tori asked a question, and then Aaron and Frida and Stephanie all had, multiple questions of clarification, and I just appreciate, because a lot of the times I have some of those same questions, and then when they ask them, because they're just simple things that we want more clarification on, it was nice to get clear answers and understanding. And I just appreciate all the members, and just through your questions, it's clear that you're paying attention and wanting to know what's going on. So, and I did hear air conditioning or ventilation, and I think Alice Ott, we have some issues with ventilation. But that's all.
Nice try, Dwayne.
Yeah, I thought I could throw that out now.
That's the old hint right there. Thank you, Dwayne. Anyone else? I'm looking for hands. I don't see any other than Dwayne's still up. I suppose my proposal then to the group would be that we close our meeting for the evening and plan to reconvene on Thursday at 6:30 to take any public comment that might be available at that time, and also to have our budget deliberations. But someone would need to move for that.
I would love to move for that, Chris, and excellent job facilitating a tight meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Pat, should we do a roll call, or do we just want to have people do a thumbs up to the camera? I guess let's just do if you don't want to end the meeting for the night, say so out loud, and otherwise we'll assume that you're an aye. It appears to be unanimous. So we will end the meeting for tonight. Thank everybody for their time. I want to thank the various school district officials and of course the principals that sat in for taking part in this. And we look forward to being back together at 6:30 on Thursday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Bye.
great evening.
Thanks,